Welcome to Brain Pickings, the podcast where we challenge the status quo in HR and explore what's next for people, work, and organizations. I'm Leslie, founder of ZigZagHR, and I'm here to help you rethink, reboot, and retool the way you lead HR. You're listening to a special series diving into the 2025 Global Human Capital Trends Report by Deloitte. In today's episode, we're looking at two powerful interwoven ideas from Deloitte's 2025 Global Human Capital Trends Report. The first is Stagility, a concept that challenges organizations to strike the right balance between stability for their people and agility for the business. In a world where constant change is a new normal, how do we help people feel grounded while enabling speed, innovation, and reinvention? And the second is about going deep, really deep into motivation. The report challenges us to move beyond broad engagement strategies and instead ask what motivates each individual. It's about tapping into what drives performance one person at a time, or what Deloitte calls the unit of one. Together, these themes point to a fundamental shift, building organizations that are not only fast and flexible, but also human-centered and personally meaningful. So how do we build this kind of workplace? Well, let's dive in together with Annelies Verbruggen, Organization Transformation Leader at Deloitte. Hey, Annelies.
Hi, Leslie.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, yeah, thank you for having me here at Deloitte Gateway. Let's dive in, Annelies. What is Stagility and why is it such a crucial concept in today's work environment?
Yeah, well, Stagility, it refers to actually the tension you see today, the tension between organizations who want more agile organizations, agility in terms of the flexibility of workers, how work gets organized, how organizations construct themselves. And at the same time, we see at worker side, at employee side, a way bigger need for stability, especially in times where there's a lot of uncertainty, also from a macroeconomic perspective. That's what people are looking for, and it's really about that tension. Now, you know that the relationship between an employer and an employee is really built on common solid grounds, and with a lot of change happening there, you see that common ground gets a bit disrupted, and that's really what Stagility refers to, and a tension between the both and how we can solve that. And just to give you, Ali, some insights, I think an employee 10 years ago had about 2 big transformations in the work context per year. Today, that's 10 transformations per year. You can really think about, for people, the constant need to having to reinvent themselves, to adapt. That's quite a heavy burden. And so how to find that balance between keeping the organization healthy, but also keeping the employee healthy. That's what Stagility is all about. All
right. Now, Deloitte's research shows a disconnect between workers seeking stability and leaders then pushing for agility. How do you think organizations then can bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, it's indeed a fact. When in the research we saw that 72% of organizations say we need more agility, but only 40% is actually doing something with it. And then if you ask, like, what are you doing? It's like 10% who is actually doing meaningful, and the others are making small steps towards bringing some more agility. And it's not an easy tension to solve. If there would be a handbook, I'm sure we would have written it by now. So that's definitely not the case. But I think it's about defining new anchors for work. And the metaphor of a boat and the nautical metaphor is quite present in the study as well. If a boat needs to be safe in a harbor, you anchor it. But the chain of the anchor, I think that's where the pressure is on. And you see that for workers look for a very small chains that keep the boat more or less stable at a place, and organizations look for a longer chain that allows to go with the flow of the water. And I think defining what that new chain, what the flexibility of that is what we will need to work on. And it is about redefining what is work actually, how do we construct that, how do we bring people together around that work, but also how do we make it meaningful from an employee perspective.
Okay, so you talk about these new anchors for workers. Can you give maybe some examples of what these new anchors might look like in practice then?
Yeah, absolutely. If you talk about work, for example, and I'm sure there is a lot about AI and technology and how that influences work, with a lot of fear and sometimes distrust. I truly believe that AI and technology are there to amplify a worker. And in the study, we refer also to a nice example at Shell, where actually where everything comes to technical inspections, they've automated that to a maximum extent. It can happen from distance, not to make workers redundant, but really for inspectors, for technical engineers, to be able to really think and develop more advanced techniques, so really to go further in their profession and their expertise. And so the work gets re-architected through AI. If you look at it from an organizational perspective, then we see internal in organizations, and there are some very nice examples also on the Belgian market, that where organizations start to think across teams and not having functional domains which each their own outcomes, but actually organization firm-wide outcomes and bringing people together around that, or the typical ecosystem thinking. Instead of saying there are so many new skills to learn, I think as an organization you're not able anymore to develop them all in-house all of the time and to keep up to speed. So to be smart around these are the skills we develop and who are partners in the network, and even organizations potentially at competition where you can work together with to actually leverage that. And I think there's still some steps to go, but really opening up around how you collaborate for bigger impact on market and on society. And from a worker's perspective, you really see that trend around moving away from job descriptions to more skill thinking. That skill-based organization is a concept that starts to get more and more introduction, where job descriptions are very fixed and where you rather think of people with their own strengths, how can they make an impact in different domains rather than in something that is very predefined with tasks and actions, but rather on impact based on skills. I think this is a bit of the new type of anchors that we will need to define.
All right. Now, how do you think HR teams then can redesign organizational structures to support both agility and employee stability?
I don't think it's an HR responsibility only. Absolutely not.
Not just for HR.
Absolutely. I think HR plays a crucial role, but I think it first starts with business leaders. Business leaders who need to be in a mindset of anticipating what the future of their work will look like. And I think a business leader is best placed or should be best placed to think, what will my market look like? What is competition doing? What are the disruptions there? And then I'm truly convinced that HR is there as a great partner, first of all, potentially to even facilitate that reflection, especially in economical difficult times. We see we tend to bend on what we know, so to open up the minds of business leaders, but then to make a translation of, if work is fundamentally different, how can we construct it? How can we organize it? What type of skills do we need? What is the best sourcing strategy for those skills? You know, in-house, out-house, how can you develop certain things? How do we let people work together? So that full translation of what new business looks like to how you construct an organization and create value for employees around that, I think HR plays a critical role, but the value will be in the dialogue between the two and really the collaboration and the partnership. For HR, it means that you understand the business extremely well, of course, and that it's not separated from what is daily happening for a company in the market.
Which is actually a big challenge.
Which is absolutely a big challenge,
okay. Now, we often hear about the shift from job-based thinking to skills-based thinking. You already mentioned it. How does that relate exactly then to Stagility?
Yeah, but I think in job-based thinking, it's quite prescriptive. You tell people, you know, these are the type of activities that we ask from you. This is what the outcomes and results are. And that brings, I think, a lot of stability, but allows for very little flexibility at this minute. There's not a lot of agility in that. And of course, you have organizations that think across that are not stuck to that anymore. But, you know, in very unionized contexts, for example, having job descriptions can be also a limitation to put people, you know, a bit on projects outside of what their strict job description describes, etc. If you look at a skill-based organization, you bring a lot of agility because obviously you get away from people having to do a job, but where are skills needed at different places in the organization, so you can flex around way more where skills can find their place. Now, there is a risk, obviously, if you would do that without any constraints, that people are sent left and right. So I think a good definition of what are a person's skills and how to develop them and the right support in that, but also a good map of which skills are needed at what type of impact and how that links together, that can really help to bring that balance. But we should avoid, obviously, that becomes a kind of chaos where people are sent anywhere just to do stuff as well.
Okay. Now, we talked about HR and business. What role does leadership play in creating Stagility, and how can they avoid tipping too far and either being too rigid or going into chaos.
Yeah. I think there's still a huge exercise to happen in changing mental models on how we think also about leadership at first. I think still in a lot of organizations and for a lot of people, leadership is defined in the number of people reporting to you, the kind of governance bodies that people are in and how they are perceived in an organization, but also the kind of what you can decide yourself for people. And a couple of years ago in the Trends, we introduced the idea of the symphonic C-suite. And I think that will be even more than ever important. So it starts there, where you need to have your senior leadership really think in organization as what are the collective outcomes we want to achieve. And obviously you need expertise, you need people to steer functional domains, but they need to think collectively together, where do we need to get? And then have the mental flexibility and have a good relationship with HR and talent departments to say, how can we navigate that now in a structured way, but in a way where we are not limited by functional silos. But that's a huge change, I think, still think in mental models, because a lot of systems in an organization, including rewards, etc., are based on old principles of hierarchy, spans of controls, and these kind of things.
Okay. And how do you think AI and emerging technologies then can be used to enhance rather than disrupt this balance between stability and agility?
But I think, as building on that idea, where you need a lot more collaboration to have that stagility, it's about really having people connected constantly. If you have platforms that allow people to look at same data sets in the same way and so have one view of reality, which if you look in organizations is rarely the case, that would be a huge advancement. And I think that's something we can have with AI and with technology, that actually you build cross-organizational platforms where different data sources come together, where that's external and internal. And I think what is the biggest blocker today very often is you have X versions of the truth, because everybody looks at a functional lens with different types of reporting and data sets. If you can have that one version of the truth, you already have a lot more people pointed in the same direction. So I think that's a very important one.
Okay, so there are a lot of opportunities, but there are also some risks and challenges that organizations should be aware of when trying to implement agility.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of risks, it's a balancing act. And I think that's why it's not an exercise that you can just do once and then it's done. And that's way more easier if you do classic org design or you do job descriptions and the like. You can write that, you can have job gradings and things, and then it's done and you implement and you're good to go. And I think with the idea of agility, it's a constant balancing act and a constant dialogue. And that's what makes it more intense, obviously. So I think the basis will always be to have good backbone constructs behind there. If you take, for example, flexibility also for people to have certain choices, if there is a framework from which they can build in, it helps to also maintain a bit chaos at a certain moment. But yeah, definitely balancing will be very important to make sure, and a constant dialogue between the different parties in a business will be extremely important.
Now, there are a lot of HR professionals listening to this podcast. For those people, what's one action that they can or maybe should take today to start building stagility into the organization?
I think start the dialogue. I think that's a really important one. Sit with business leaders and help them project towards the future. What is the future of your business look like? What is coming ahead there? Because I think more than ever, given the economical challenges that a lot of organizations are facing, people tend to go back, that's human nature, to old mental models to see what worked in the past, to copycats of themselves very often, because it brings peace of mind. You can control that, that's known. And I think that's the biggest trap we can have now, going to what is known for a future that will be by default very different. And you need to prepare for something that we can't grasp yet. It's very uncomfortable, actually. But I think an HR professional who can start a dialogue with the business, help them prepare, reflect, I think that will be a critical action to take.
Start a dialogue and maybe facilitate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Now, I would also like to zoom in on a deceptively simple question with Annelies. What really moves your people? What if understanding what drives each person uniquely could be the key to higher engagement, innovation, impact? What does it take to personalize motivation, then scale it across the workforce and build a culture where people want to bring the best of themselves. Now, in the Human Capital Trends Report, this is described as tapping into the motivation at the unit of one. I really like it.
Yeah.
What does it mean, and how come that it's so often overlooked then in organizational design?
Yeah, it seems indeed extremely simple. But I think tapping into the motivation at the unit of one is really looking at what drives an individual. And I think in last years, we've seen a lot of persona thinking in organizations, which is great. It helps to structure certain elements. But as a consequence, we tend to really think in very prefixed schemes. And there's a nice example, I think, in the trends as well that's elaborated there. If you take two employees, let's say two female colleagues in an organization, mid-30s, both have families, two kids, for example, high performer in the organization, have been there for 10 years, really great evaluations at the end of each year. As an organization, what do we tend to do? They have the same characteristics, so we tend to offer the same job opportunities, the same job paths and the likes. Where in reality, if you would ask, it could very well be that the first person will say, well, what is extremely important for me, and I've lived that in my own teams as well, I find job titles very important. I find financial health and financial recognition extremely important. That's the things that make me thrive. Where the other person can say, for me, the fact that I'm a high performer in investment is because I'm fundamentally driven by personal growth. I need to develop as a human and as a professional every year. There is a big risk, because of the similarity between profiles, personas as often defined, that we do exactly the same, where we will not tap into the motivation of one or the other. And then obviously, if you want a high-performing organization, you need to build on the strengths and the energizers of people. That's extremely important. And that is actually what the trend is suggesting, to go way deeper in that. Why is it such a challenge? I think there's two things for me. First of all, I think we tend to confuse engagement with motivation.
Yes.
A lot of organizations measure engagement of people. How do we measure engagements? We say, what is our EVP as an organization? What do we want to bring forward? And that's the things we want to be known for as an organization. And we measure how we do on those things. It doesn't tell you anything about what drives as an individual. And it exists. They're in the market. There are great motivational questionnaires and things like that. But there are very little organizations that I know, at least, that take that. It's sometimes in selection processes, you see that, but that really go into, but what is thriving our people? We measure them towards our reference framework. We don't measure against actually what is in the person.
We're not asking the right questions.
We just don't ask
and
it,
we
no?
don't listen. If we ask, I think we don't even listen. Okay. How does understanding individual motivation support both personal growth and organizational stagility then?
Yeah, but I think personal growth, I'm fundamentally convinced that you get the best out of people when you thrive on what they are good at. Obviously, everybody likes to develop also, but also what gives them energy. And that's really about, I think, a fundamental human value, that you feel that you make an impact, that you can contribute somewhere. So I think the more you go into motivation, the better you can construct work and impacts of people around that. And I'm sure that will make people flourish. And especially as it is so different, and the more you can diversify, the better that gets. How it creates agility for me, because you will have same profiles, same talents in very different areas of your organization. If you go back to my example, you could really have the very different career paths, even lateral career paths and the likes, for your high performers. And today we put people who are doing really well in the organization very often all in the same box, in same type of impact, same types of roles also in an organization, mostly up the career ladder, instead of thinking maybe there are very other places in an organization where they will completely make the difference without a very traditional upwards model.
Yeah. Now, what kind of data should HR teams then be collecting to better understand what motivates their people, and how can they do it in an ethical way?
Yeah. That's not an easy one, obviously. I think there are data in terms of, first of all, what are the personal interests of an of a person, and I think it's personal and professional things. So I would typically be looking at things like what are the skills a person brings, what are preferred working styles a person brings, what are personality traits that people have, but also what are passions outside of work. Sometimes you discover people who have great interests that actually reveal a skill that is super useful for work, but you just haven't realized. And then really asking about also the motivational drivers. in an ethical way. I think these are things that touch a person, so you need to do it in the right way. Different things you can do, I think, and you mentioned it already, Leslie, talking with people and actually, but really listening is a very big one. I think taking time to engage in the right conversations around those topics will be fundamental. That can be a role of HR, but also I think of business leadership. Obviously, if you do that in the context where it typically happens in an evaluation conversation, that's probably not the right setting to get, there is two objectives of a conversation then. So I would really think that just setting time apart to get to know people at their core, spend time on that, being transparent also on the data you keep around that. You can have structured forms. Some organizations use self-reporting, with questionnaires and things where it's very transparent to people what they answer to and how data are treated. I think those are a couple of things that you can use. But I think, questionnaires and those things and self-reporting are great. I'm a fundamental believer in the power of conversation, active listening, and then really engaging and co-creating also what you do with that motivation together.
Okay. Now, are there also risks in trying to personalize motivation, and how can we navigate them?
But I think so. From an organizational perspective, obviously, it's nice to do it very personalized if you have a small number of employees. If I think for ourselves, for example, with 2,000 people in our consultative business already, that would be a bigger challenge, obviously. So I think you need to have a set of frameworks, and you start to see that on the market. For example, in cafeteria plans and flex plans, where you give freedom for people, for example, to say you have a learning budget where you are free. So, instead of saying these are the educations, you have a freedom within a frame, but you help people navigating towards what are different options, etc., to structure it a bit and to keep a certain form of containment, because obviously you want to make sure that you still offer equal opportunities to people, and that's more than ever important, that there's pay transparency and those benefits come to that, but also that you still respect that every same work gets the same opportunities in an organization. I think from an employee perspective, there is a risk of being overwhelmed. L'embarras du choix. If all of a sudden you get everything thrown at you, I could imagine that for some people, they would just like that somebody tells them and is guided. So there again, you need to be very much in sync with different, and probably have some scenarios and some schemes that people can opt in depending on what works best for them.
Okay. Now, if an HR leader is just getting started with all this, what's one simple step that he or she can take to begin tapping into the motivation?
Then I would say it's all about data and insights.
Okay.
I think that's the first thing, because we, with all good intentions and not just HR and business, I think we often tend to start taking actions on an own reference frame, and then you pass by that entire motivation element. So I think first getting the insights to understand how widely spread our motivational drivers in an organization, what can we offer, and do we take the right things? Because very often in organizations you see a lot is offered where actually it's not what people are asking for, and it costs a lot of money and time and investment. So I think collecting data and insights, that's the first thing I would focus on, to have a very deliberate choice and way forward afterwards.
All right, so that's a really, really easy, clear objective for HR professionals. This was really a very inspiring conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for today's episode in our special series on Deloitte 2025 Human Capital Trends. If this conversation inspired you, challenged your thinking, or gave you new ideas, well then share it with your colleagues, with your team, and with your network. Let's spread the insights and spark even more meaningful conversations in the world of work. Thank you for tuning in and for listening. And remember, it's a great time to be in HR.